He chose the quietest place in the house. Morning light settled gently across the kitchen counter. 2 cups, one hand steady, one gesture practiced. Jeremiah Whitmore set the tea in front of his wife like a man who believed in routine, like a man who believed he was unseen. Across from him, Clara Whitmore accepted the cup without hesitation. He thought she trusted him. He did not know she had already watched him measured, precise, careful, in all the wrong ways. And he did not know that this time, the mistake would be his. If you believe truth doesn't need to shout to be heard, stay with this story until the end. Before we go on, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. And if you value quiet strength and justice that speaks through evidence, consider subscribing. Clara Whitmore had always been the kind of woman people trusted without quite knowing why. It wasn't because she spoke often she didn't, nor was it because she offered warmth in obvious ways. Clara's presence was quieter than that, measured, deliberate. She listened fully, responded carefully, and remembered details others dismissed. In another life, she might have been a researcher or an archivist. In this one, she worked as a compliance analyst for a mid-sized healthcare firm just outside Columbus, Ohio, where precision was not just valued, but required. She lived her life the same way she approached her work, in patterns and records and quiet observations that accumulated over time into something undeniable. From the outside, her marriage looked like a continuation of that order. Jeremiah Whitmore was by most accounts a good man. He worked in financial consulting, private clients, discreet portfolios, long hours. He dressed well without being flashy. He spoke with a kind of calm authority that made people feel safe placing decisions in his hands. Neighbors greeted him with easy familiarity. At community gatherings, he remembered names, asked the right questions, laughed at the right moments. More than once, someone had said to Clara, "You're lucky. He's steady." She had smiled when they said it, not because she agreed, not because she disagreed, but because it was easier than explaining something she herself had not fully defined. Their home reflected that same careful illusion. A 2-story house in a quiet suburban neighborhood, white siding, a trimmed lawn, a kitchen that faced east, catching the first light of morning through wide, clean windows. Everything in its place. Nothing excessive, nothing obviously wrong. They had routines. Morning coffee or tea for Clara. Jeremiah usually prepared it. He said he liked having something small he could do for her before the day began. It had once felt like a kindness, a gesture that required no discussion. Evenings were structured. Dinner around 7. Television sometimes. Work emails often. Weekends filled with errands, occasional dinners with acquaintances, and long stretches of silence that neither of them rushed to fill. From the outside, it resembled stability. From the inside, it had begun slowly, almost invisibly, to shift. The first changes were small enough to dismiss. Jeremiah started asking more questions about Clara's schedule, not in a suspicious way, not overtly, just frequently. "What time will you be back today? Do you have meetings all afternoon? Did you eat yet?" At first, it sounded like concern. It was framed that way, delivered gently, always with a reason. But Clara noticed something else beneath it. Tracking. Not control in the obvious sense. No raised voice, no restrictions, but an increasing awareness of where she was, what she consumed, how her day moved. A quiet mapping of her habits. She did not confront him. She adjusted instead, answering simply, offering less detail where she could without creating tension. Not out of fear, but out of instinct. A subtle recalibration. Then there were the finances. Jeremiah had always handled the bulk of their investments. It made sense. It was his field. Clara had access to their joint accounts, of course, but she rarely needed to intervene. Their bills were paid. Their savings grew at a steady, predictable rate, until they didn't. It wasn't dramatic. There was no sudden loss, no crisis, just inconsistencies. A transfer that appeared and then disappeared from one account to another. A statement that arrived later than usual. a notification that Jeremiah dismissed quickly, too quickly. When she asked, he had explanations ready. Temporary repositioning, client overlap, tax strategy. The language was dense enough to discourage further questions, and he delivered it with the same calm confidence he used with clients. Clara did not argue. She simply began to look more closely. Not immediately, not all at once, but over time. She noted dates, amounts, patterns. Not because she believed something was wrong, because she could not prove that it wasn't. There were other things too. Smaller, stranger. Jeremiah spending more time in the kitchen than he used to, not cooking exactly. Preparing, measuring, cleaning with a level of attention that felt precise. He began buying different brands of tea. Clara had always preferred one specific kind, light floral, consistent. He replaced it once, saying the store had been out. Then again a week later. It's similar, he told her. It wasn't. Clara noticed the difference immediately. The color steeped slightly darker. The aroma carried a faint bitterness at the edge. She drank it anyway. The first time, she felt nothing. The second time, a mild headache that she attributed to a long day at work. The third time, nausea brief but distinct. She did not mention it. Not to Jeremiah, not to anyone. Instead, she began to align those moments with everything else she had been quietly observing. Dates, times, meals, drinks. It wasn't paranoia. Paranoia is loud. It demands attention. It accelerates. What Clara experienced was quieter than that. It was a pattern forming slowly enough that it could still be denied. And so, she did not accuse. She watched. Jeremiah, for his part, remained consistent, at least on the surface. He still greeted her in the evenings, still asked about her day, still maintained the structure that made their life appear intact. But there were fractures. In the way he paused half a second too long when she entered a room unexpectedly. In the way he closed his laptop more quickly than necessary. In the way his phone remained face down on the table. Always within reach, rarely unattended. None of it was proof. But Clara did not require certainty to begin documenting. She had always kept notebooks simple, unassuming. Lists, schedules, reminders. Now she added something else. Observations. She did not label them as such. She didn't need to. A date, a time, a note. Tea taste slightly bitter. Headache 30 minutes after. Jeremiah in kitchen longer than usual. Short entries, neutral language, no conclusions. It was not a diary. It was a record. There is a difference. One evening, as the sun set through the kitchen window, Clara stood by the sink rinsing a cup that had already been clean. Behind her, Jeremiah moved through the room with practiced ease, opening cabinets, closing them, adjusting something that did not need adjusting. Long day, he asked. Yes, she replied. A pause. You should rest, he said. I'll make tea. Clara turned off the water, set the cup aside, dried her hands slowly. Okay, she said. She did not watch him immediately. She walked to the living room, sat down, waited, listened. The sound of the kettle, the faint clink of ceramic, the measured movements of someone who believed routine was invisible. Then silence. When he brought the cup to her, his expression was unchanged. Calm, attentive. She took it. Thank you. Their fingers brushed for a moment. His hand was steady. So was hers. She lifted the cup, paused not long enough to be noticed. Just long enough to register the scent. Different. Again. She took a sip. Warm, slightly bitter. Familiar now in a way it hadn't been before. Jeremiah sat across from her, watching not directly, but enough. How is it, he asked. Good, Clara said. And she meant it. Not because of the taste, but because in that moment, something shifted, not in the room, but in her understanding of it. This was no longer a question of discomfort, no longer a series of unrelated details. It was a structure, and structures once recognized could be traced. Clara set the cup down gently. She would not confront him. Not yet. Because whatever this was, it was careful. And anything careful required something stronger than reaction. It required patience. It required record. It required time. Jeremiah smiled faintly, reassured by her response. He believed the moment had passed. He believed the pattern remained his alone. Across from him, Clara Whitmore memorized everything and said nothing. The first certainty did not arrive like a revelation. It came quietly, almost politely disguised as a detail too small to confront. It was a Tuesday morning. Clara Whitmore woke before her alarm, as she often did. The house was still. No movement from the hallway, no sound from the kitchen. Jeremiah was still asleep, or at least he appeared to be when she passed the bedroom door. She followed her routine without deviation. Shower, clothes laid out the night before, hair tied back, laptop bag checked twice. It was a life built on repetition, not out of rigidity, but out of clarity. The fewer variables, the easier it was to notice when something didn't belong. That morning, something didn't. When she entered the kitchen, the kettle was already warm, not boiling, not steaming, just recently used. Clara paused in the doorway, her hand still resting lightly against the frame. She had not heard Jeremiah wake. She had not heard the kettle, and yet there it was, subtly out of place. She stepped inside without comment. The counter was clean as always. The mugs were aligned beside the sink. The tea container sat slightly closer to the edge than usual. A small shift. But Clara did not adjust it. She moved through the space as if nothing had changed, because to do otherwise would introduce a reaction. And reactions, she understood, altered outcomes. Behind her, footsteps approached. "Morning," Jeremiah said, his voice even. She turned slightly. "Morning. You're up early? So are you." A brief pause. Not long enough for anyone else to register. Long enough for Clara to notice. "I had some emails," he said. "Couldn't sleep." He moved past her, reaching for the kettle with practiced ease. Clara watched not directly, but through peripheral awareness. The way one tracks movement without signaling attention. Jeremiah opened the tea container. Not the one she had used for years. The newer one. He measured carefully. Not casually, not absent-mindedly. Each movement deliberate, controlled, as though precision mattered more than habit. Clara turned away before he could sense her gaze. She reached for a spoon she did not need, adjusted it, set it back. Normal motions, neutral. Jeremiah poured the water. Steam rose, curling upward in thin, controlled lines. He waited, timing the steep, counting silently, or perhaps not so silently. Then he set the cup in front of her. "Here," he said. Clara looked at it. The color was slightly darker than she preferred. Not enough to reject, enough to note. "Thanks." She wrapped her fingers around the mug. It was warmer than expected, as though it had been poured earlier and reheated or prepared in advance. Another detail. She lifted it slowly. The scent reached her first. There it was again. Not strong, not obvious, but present. A faint edge beneath the tea's floral base. Something that didn't belong but had learned to hide. Clara took a sip. She did not hesitate, because hesitation would have been visible. The taste confirmed what the scent suggested. Slightly bitter, unfamiliar, but not accidental. She swallowed. Jeremiah moved around the kitchen, not watching her directly, opening a drawer, closing it, checking his phone briefly, then placing it face down on the counter. "How is it?" he asked. "Good," Clara replied. The same answer as before. Consistent, reliable. He nodded once satisfied. And that was when Clara understood something important. He expected consistency from her reactions, from her behavior, from her trust, and he relied on that expectation. She took another sip, not because she wanted to, because deviation would create data for him. She needed the opposite, for now. Silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable, not tense, just structured. Clara set the cup down after a few minutes. Not empty, but not full. "Running a little early today," she said. Jeremiah glanced at the clock. That's good. I'll head out soon. Drive safe. Always the same phrase? Always delivered the same way? Clara nodded. She gathered her bag, checked for her keys, phone, notebook. Before leaving, she reached for the cup again, lifting it just slightly as if reconsidering. Then she set it back down. A choice that looked casual, but wasn't. "I'll finish it when I get back," she said. Jeremiah's expression did not change, but something behind it did. A flicker. Gone almost immediately. "Sure," he said. Clara left the house at 7:42 a.m. She noted the time without looking at her watch. In the car, she did not start the engine immediately. Instead, she sat still, hands resting lightly on the steering wheel, eyes fixed on nothing in particular. Then slowly she reached into her bag and pulled out her notebook. The same one she'd been using, plain cover, no label. She opened to a fresh line. Her handwriting was small, precise, consistent. She wrote Tuesday, 7:30 a.m., tea prepared before arrival. Different container used. Scent faint bitterness. Taste consistent with previous. Did not finish cup. She paused, then added, Jeremiah awake before audible movement. Kettle warm prior to entry. No conclusions, no speculation. Only what could be observed. She closed the notebook, started the car, and drove to work. By mid-morning, the symptoms began. Not immediately. That too was part of the pattern. At 9:15 a.m., a dull pressure formed behind her eyes. At 9:40, it sharpened slightly enough to distract, not enough to disable. At 10:05, nausea. Subtle, manageable, but present. Clara did not react outwardly. She continued working, reviewed reports, answered emails, attended a meeting where she spoke only when necessary. But internally, she aligned the timeline. Ingestion, delay, onset, progression, consistency. At 10:30, she excused herself briefly. Not dramatically, not urgently, just enough. In the restroom, she stood at the sink, gripping the edge lightly. Her reflection looked the same. Composed, controlled. Only her eyes gave anything away, and even that only if someone knew what to look for. She waited, not for the symptoms to pass, for them to stabilize. When they did, she reached into her bag again. The notebook. A new line. 10:05, nausea onset. 10:30, stable. Pattern consistent with prior entries. She closed it, returned to her desk. That evening, when she came home, the cup was gone. The sink was empty. The kitchen reset to its usual state. No trace. Clara walked through the space slowly, not searching, confirming. Jeremiah was in the living room. "Hey," he said. "How was your day? Busy?" she replied. He nodded. "Dinner soon." She placed her bag down, washed her hands. Routine, always routine. "Did you drink the tea?" he asked casually. Clara turned off the faucet. "Yes." Not entirely true, not entirely false. "Good," he said, a simple word. But it settled differently in the room. Clara dried her hands, walked back into the kitchen, opened the cabinet where the tea containers were kept. Both were there, the old one and the new one. She reached for neither, closed the cabinet, and in that moment, without announcement, without confrontation, without even a visible shift in posture, Clara Whitmore crossed from uncertainty into understanding. This was no longer a suspicion, no longer a possibility. It was a pattern. And patterns, once confirmed, did not require belief. They required response. But not yet. Not until the record was complete. Not until every variable had been observed. Not until there was no space left for denial by anyone. Clara turned off the kitchen light and said nothing. Clara Whitmore did not begin by seeking proof. She began by removing uncertainty. There was a difference. Proof required confrontation, at least eventually. It required presenting something to another person, someone who might deny, deflect, or reinterpret. Uncertainty, on the other hand, could be reduced in silence. And silence, Clara understood, was where she held the advantage. The next morning, she woke even earlier, not because she was restless, because she needed to arrive before anything could be prepared without her awareness. At 6:02 a.m., the house was still. No kettle, no movement, no footsteps in the hallway. Good. Clara moved through her routine with deliberate quiet. Every action controlled, every sound minimized. She dressed, gathered her things, and then went to the kitchen before Jeremiah could enter it first. The room looked the way it should. Clean counters, aligned mugs, tea containers untouched. She stood there for a moment, taking in the absence of disturbance. Then she did something she had never done before. She prepared her own tea, not out of preference, out of necessity. She chose the original container, the one she had used for years. Measured the leaves, boiled the water, timed the steep exactly as she always had. Nothing extra, nothing altered. She poured the tea into a mug and placed it on the counter. Then she waited. Jeremiah entered at 6:18 a.m. He paused just slightly when he saw her already in the kitchen. "You're up early," he said. "So are you." A repetition from the previous day. But this time, Clara watched him directly. Not long enough to be confrontational, just long enough to register the micro-adjustment in his expression. He had expected something else. Not this. "I thought I'd get a head start," she added, lifting her mug slightly. "Made my own tea." Jeremiah's gaze flicked to the cup, then back to her. "That's good," he said. "Neutral, but not natural." He moved to the counter, opening a cabinet he didn't need, closing it again. A small displacement behavior filling space where routine had been interrupted. Clara took a sip. The taste was exactly what it should be. Clean, familiar, predictable. No bitterness, no edge, no deviation. She noted it without writing it down. Yet. Jeremiah reached for the kettle, then stopped. There was nothing to prepare, nothing to offer, nothing to control. So he said, turning slightly big day, not particularly. Another sip, another confirmation. Jeremiah nodded, but his movements had lost their earlier precision. He lingered in the kitchen longer than necessary, as though recalculating something that had been disrupted. Clara finished half the cup, left the rest. "I'll head out," she said. "Drive safe," the same phrase. But this time it carried less certainty. At work, Clara experienced no symptoms, no headache, no nausea, no delayed onset. Nothing. It was in its own way the most definitive data she had gathered so far. She documented it during her lunch break. Self-prepared tea, no symptoms, control condition. She underlined the last phrase once. Not for emphasis, for clarity. That evening, she returned home at her usual time. The kitchen was quiet. Jeremiah was already there. "Hey," he said. "I was just about to make tea." Clara set her bag down. "I'll join you." A simple sentence. But it shifted the structure again. Jeremiah hesitated, barely perceptible, then nodded. "Of course." He turned toward the counter. Clara moved closer than she normally would. Not intrusive, present. She watched, not openly, but without hiding the fact that she was there. Jeremiah reached for the tea container, the newer one. His fingers paused on the lid, a fraction of a second. Then he opened it, measured, poured, everything as before. But now the variables were different. Clara stood within range, within observation, within influence. He completed the preparation and handed her the cup. "Here. Thank you." Their fingers touched again. Still steady, still controlled. Clara lifted the cup. This time she did not sip immediately. Instead she spoke. "You've been working late," she said. Jeremiah looked up. "Yeah, a few things to wrap up." What kind of thing's a normal question? One a spouse might ask, but it landed differently. "Client work," he replied. "Anything I'd understand?" A slight smile accompanied the question, light, casual. Jeremiah exhaled softly. Probably not. It's a bit technical. Clara nodded, then took a sip. There it was again. The same bitterness. Consistent, reliable, not accidental. She set the cup down. Still using the new tea, she asked. Yeah, you don't like it. It's different. Different isn't always bad. No, Clara said. It isn't. Silence followed, not uncomfortable, but not neutral either. Jeremiah watched her more directly now, not openly, but enough. Clara reached for the cup again, lifted it, then set it back down. I might switch back, she said, to the old one. Jeremiah's hand resting on the counter tightened slightly. You liked this one before, he said. I thought I did. Another small shift, another recalculation. That night, after Jeremiah had gone to bed, Clara returned to the kitchen. The house was quiet again. She moved without turning on the overhead light, relying on the faint glow from the hallway. She opened the cabinet, took out both tea containers, placed them side by side on the counter. The old one, the new one. She did not open them immediately. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out a small glass vial. Clear, sterile, sealed. She had purchased it earlier that day. No label, no indication of purpose, just capacity. Clara opened the newer tea container first. The scent was faint, but present. She poured a small amount into the vial, sealed it, then repeated the process with the old container. 2 samples, identical in appearance, separated in origin. She placed them in her bag, then wiped the counter, replaced the containers exactly as she had found them. No trace. The next step required more than observation. It required preservation. Clara sat at the kitchen table and opened a new notebook. Not the one she had been using, a second one. This one would not contain daily entries. It would contain structure. She wrote at the top of the first page, record-controlled observations. Beneath it, she listed sample a new tea. Jeremiah selected sample B. Original tea, self-selected symptoms present versus absent timing ingestion to onset behavioral indicators. Subject Jeremiah. She paused. Then added one more line. Chain of custody maintained. She closed the notebook. Upstairs, Jeremiah shifted in his sleep. Restless, unsettled, even without knowing exactly why. Because something in the pattern had changed. Something he could not yet see, but could feel. Clara remained at the table for a few moments longer, not thinking, not reacting, just allowing the structure to settle into place. This was no longer about suspicion. It was no longer about interpretation. It was about verification. And verification required one thing above all else: consistency. She would not rush. She would not confront. She would not deviate. Because whatever Jeremiah was doing, he believed it was controlled. He believed it was invisible. And most importantly, he believed Clara would continue to play her part. She stood, turned off the light, and left the kitchen exactly as it had been. Except now everything inside it had been recorded. Jeremiah Whitmore chose his moments carefully. He preferred mornings when the house was quiet and predictable, when light filtered softly through the kitchen windows and the world outside had not yet introduced variables he could not control. It was in those hours that his actions felt most contained, most precise. Clara understood this before he did. That morning, she did not wake earlier than him. She allowed the pattern to return. At 6:47 a.m., she heard movement in the kitchen, the kettle, the faint clink of ceramic, the deliberate pacing she had come to recognize. She remained in bed for another 3 minutes, eyes open, breathing, even listening. Then she rose. Not quickly, not slowly, at exactly the speed she always had. When Clara entered the kitchen, Jeremiah was already at the counter. 2 mugs, steam rising, everything in place. "Morning," he said. "Morning." His voice was smooth again, recovered, adjusted. The previous disruptions had been absorbed into a new version of routine. Clara stepped forward, setting her bag near the chair. "You're up early," he added. "I slept well." A small, harmless lie. Jeremiah nodded as though this confirmed something for him. I made tea. I could see that. There was no edge in her tone, no accusation, just observation. Jeremiah picked up one of the mugs, held it out to her. Here. Clara accepted it. The cup was warm, not overly so, prepared with the same careful timing she had seen before. She wrapped her fingers around it, grounding herself in the sensation, not because she needed reassurance, but because she cataloged everything. Across from her, Jeremiah picked up the second mug. He did not drink immediately. He waited, as though there was an order to things. A sequence. Clara understood that sequence. And for the first time, she interrupted it. Did you sleep at all? She asked, lifting her gaze to meet his. Jeremiah blinked slightly, caught off guard by the question. Yeah, enough. You seemed restless last night. A neutral statement. Not probing, but precise. Jeremiah shifted his weight. Just thinking about work. Anything serious? No. He paused. Nothing you need to worry about? Clara nodded. Of course. That was always the answer. She lowered her gaze back to the cup. And in that moment, Jeremiah looked away. Just briefly. Just enough. It was all she needed. Clara moved. Not abruptly. Not in a way that would draw attention. She adjusted her position at the counter, reaching for a napkin with her free hand. The movement required her to set the cup down. She placed it slightly to the right, closer to Jeremiah. His cup, already resting near him, remained where it was. The two mugs, identical in shape, color, weight, now occupied reversed positions. No sound, no collision, no visible intent, just a shift. Clara picked up the cup nearest to her again. Not the one she'd been holding, the other one. Jeremiah turned back just as she lifted it. His expression remained unchanged. Because he had not seen. Because he had not expected to look. Because he believed the variables were fixed. Clara raised the cup, paused, then took a sip. The taste was clean, familiar, unaltered. Sample B. She swallowed, set the cup down. Across from her, Jeremiah lifted his own. Without hesitation, without suspicion, without knowledge. He drank. The first sip meant nothing. The second confirmed it. The third sealed it. Clara watched him not directly, but through the quiet awareness she had cultivated over weeks of observation. Jeremiah set his cup down after several sips. Still like this one? He asked. Clara nodded. It's better. A simple truth, delivered without emphasis. Jeremiah exhaled softly, almost imperceptibly. Relief. He lifted the cup again, drank more. Clara did not touch hers. She let it sit, untouched, unnecessary. Time passed, not long, but long enough. Jeremiah's posture shifted first, a slight adjustment in his shoulders. Then his hand moved to the counter, fingers spreading, as though seeking balance. Clara noticed the change before he did. How's your day looking? She asked. Jeremiah blinked. Fine, he said, but his voice had altered, subtly, tightened. He cleared his throat, reached for the cup again, stopped. Something wasn't aligning, not yet consciously, but physically. Clara also remained still, composed, observing. At 7:02 a.m., Jeremiah's breathing changed. Not dramatically, just uneven. He shifted again, this time more noticeably. You okay? Clara asked. The question was soft, concerned, appropriate. Jeremiah nodded too quickly. Yeah, just lightheaded. Clara tilted her head slightly. Did you eat? Not yet. That might be it. He nodded again, but his hand now gripped the edge of the counter, knuckles pale. Clara stood where she was, not moving toward him, not retreating, present. The realization came slowly, not as a sudden shock, but as a misalignment he could not correct. Jeremiah looked at the cup, then at Clara, then back at the cup. His eyes narrowed slightly, calculating, reconstructing. Too late. Clara met his gaze, not with accusation, not with triumph, with stillness. "Clara," he began. The word carried uncertainty for the first time. Yes, his mouth opened, closed. The structure he had relied on, routine, control, predictability, had fractured, and he did not yet understand how. "I don't feel." He stopped. Clara stepped forward then, not quickly, but decisively. She reached for her phone. "I'm calling an ambulance," she said. Jeremiah's head snapped up. "No, it's okay," Clara replied. Calm, measured. "You're not well. I'm fine," he insisted. But his voice betrayed him. His balance shifted again. This time he had to brace himself fully against the counter. Clara dialed, gave the address, spoke clearly, precisely. "No, he's conscious. Yes. Sudden onset. Dizziness, instability." She ended the call, set the phone down, and then she waited. Jeremiah stared at her. Something had changed in his eyes. Not just confusion, recognition. Not complete, but forming. "You switched," he said the words, struggling to assemble. Clara did not respond, because he had not finished the sentence, because he did not yet know how, because anything she said would be unnecessary. Jeremiah's breathing grew uneven. His hand slipped slightly on the counter. He caught himself, barely. Clara stepped closer now, close enough to intervene if he fell, but not touching him. Not yet. "You should sit," she said. A suggestion, not a command. Jeremiah lowered himself into the chair slowly, every movement deliberate, controlled, fighting something internal he could no longer ignore. Clara moved the untouched cup, the one he had prepared for her, slightly farther away, out of reach, not as an accusation, as preservation. Sirens approached in the distance. Faint at first, then clearer. Jeremiah looked toward the window, then back at Clara. There was something in his expression now that had not been there before. Not anger, not fear alone, but understanding, partial, incomplete. But enough. Clara met his gaze one last time, still silent, still composed. She had not raised her voice, had not accused him, had not explained anything. Because she didn't need to. The pattern had revealed itself. The structure had held. The variables had aligned. And Jeremiah Whitmore, for the first time, was no longer in control of the outcome. The sirens stopped outside. Clara walked to the door, opened it, and stepped aside. The paramedics entered the house with the practiced urgency of people who had seen too many variations of the same moment. Clara stepped aside to give them space, her posture calm, her voice steady, as she repeated the address and the sequence of events. She did not rush her words, nor did she dramatize anything. She described only what could be observed. Jeremiah had been standing in the kitchen. He reported dizziness. His balance became unstable. He sat down. His breathing changed. The onset was sudden. One of the paramedics, a tall man with a clipped tone and efficient hands, knelt beside Jeremiah while his partner began preparing the equipment. A blood pressure cuff wrapped around Jeremiah's arm. A pulse oximeter clipped to his finger. Questions were asked in short, direct intervals. "Sir, can you tell me your name?" Jeremiah answered, though his voice lacked its usual composure. "Jeremiah Whitmore." "Do you know where you are, my house? What are you feeling right now, dizzy? Nauseous?" The paramedic nodded and exchanged a brief glance with his partner. The look was subtle, but it carried meaning. Something about this was not routine, not entirely. Clara remained near the doorway, close enough to hear, far enough not to interfere. She did not hover. She did not interrupt. Her hands rested loosely at her sides, her breathing, even her attention, fixed on details rather than emotion. "When did this start?" the paramedic asked. Jeremiah hesitated. "A few minutes ago." "What were you doing right before that?" Jeremiah's eyes flicked briefly toward Clara, then away again. Just Drinking tea. The paramedic followed the glance, his attention shifting momentarily to the kitchen counter. 2 cups, one partially full, one nearly empty. Nothing unusual at first glance, but enough to be noted. Did you eat anything else? Take any medication? No. Any known allergies? No. The questions continued, forming a structure that Clara recognized. Establishing baseline, identifying variables, eliminating coincidence. She listened carefully, committing each answer to memory. The second paramedic stood and moved toward the counter, not touching anything, just observing. His eyes moved from the cups to the tea containers, then back again. He did not comment. He did not need to. "Ma'am," he said, turning to Clara. "Did he have anything unusual this morning?" Clara met his gaze without hesitation. "He had tea," she said. "Prepared in the kitchen. By you, no." A brief pause. "By him." The paramedic nodded slowly. "Did you drink any?" "Yes." "Are you experiencing any symptoms?" "No." Another glance exchanged between the 2 paramedics. Not suspicion, not yet, but awareness. "Okay," the first paramedic said, shifting back to Jeremiah. "We're going to take you to the hospital, run some tests, make sure everything is stable." "I don't need a hospital," Jeremiah said quickly, though his voice wavered. "It's just a precaution," the paramedic replied. "Better to be safe." Jeremiah opened his mouth to argue again, but the effort seemed to cost him. His hand tightened against the chair, his breathing uneven. Clara stepped forward then, not abruptly, but with quiet decisiveness. "It's better if you go," she said. Her tone was gentle, supportive, entirely aligned with what anyone in her position might say. Jeremiah looked at her, searching for something in her expression. Reassurance, denial, anything that might restore the structure he had relied on. He found none, only calm. He nodded once reluctantly. "Okay." The paramedics moved efficiently, guiding him onto the stretcher, securing the straps, monitoring his vitals as they prepared to move him out of the house. Clara followed them to the door. Her steps measured, her attention still anchored in observation rather than reaction. As they passed the threshold, one of the paramedics paused briefly. "Ma'am, are you coming with us?" Clara considered the question for a fraction of a second. "Yes," she said. She turned back once, her gaze sweeping across the kitchen. The cups remained where they had been. The tea containers sat untouched in the cabinet. The room held its shape, its quiet order, as though nothing significant had occurred. But Clara knew better. She closed the door behind her and followed the stretcher to the ambulance. Inside, the space was narrow, controlled, filled with the hum of medical equipment and the low, steady voices of professionals who did not speculate beyond what they could measure. Jeremiah lay on the stretcher, his eyes open, but unfocused, his body attempting to maintain control over something that was slipping beyond it. Clara sat on the bench across from him, her hands folded in her lap. The paramedic continued asking questions, documenting responses, noting inconsistencies. "Any recent changes in your health? No, any stress work?" "Just work." "Any new substances, food, supplements?" Jeremiah hesitated again. "No." Clara listened to each answer, aligning them with what she already knew. Not contradicting, not correcting, simply allowing the record to form. At one point, Jeremiah's gaze met hers again. There was something different in it now. Not just confusion, not just physical discomfort, but a growing awareness that something had gone wrong in a way he had not anticipated. Clara did not look away. She did not offer comfort in words. Her presence alone was enough. The ambulance arrived at the hospital within minutes. The doors opened and the controlled urgency resumed as Jeremiah was transferred inside into a brighter, more clinical environment where variables could be measured more precisely and where narratives mattered less than results. A nurse took over, guiding the stretcher into an examination room, while another began asking Clara for basic information. Name Clara Whitmore. Relationship to patient wife. Do you know what happened? Clara paused just long enough to ensure her answer would be exact. He reported dizziness after drinking tea, she said. The onset was sudden. Did he ingest anything else? Not that I observed. The nurse nodded and made a note. Have you had any symptoms? No. Did you drink the same tea? Yes. Another pause. Another note. Okay. We'll run some tests and see what we're dealing with. Clara stepped back as the medical team moved around Jeremiah, attaching monitors, drawing blood, preparing to stabilize whatever imbalance had been introduced into his system. The room filled with quiet efficiency, each action part of a larger process designed to uncover what the surface could not explain. Clara watched from the side, her expression unchanged. She noted the time, the sequence, the words used. She noted Jeremiah's responses, the way he avoided certain details, the way his answers remained vague where specificity would have been expected. She did not intervene, because this was no longer a private moment. It was becoming a record. And records once established in places like this carried weight beyond conversation. After some time, a doctor entered the room. A woman in her 40s, composed, focused, with a kind of presence that suggested both authority and restraint. "I'm Dr. Melissa Grant," she said, addressing both of them. "We're going to run a series of tests to determine what's causing these symptoms. In the meantime, we'll keep him under observation." Jeremiah nodded weakly. Clara inclined her head slightly in acknowledgement. Dr. Grant turned to her. "Mrs. Whitmore, I may need to ask you a few more questions later." "Of course," Clara replied. The doctor studied her for a moment, not suspiciously, but carefully, as though assessing not just what had been said, but how it had been said. Then she nodded and turned back to her patient. Clara remained where she was, silent, composed, present. She did not need to speak further. Everything that mattered had already begun to unfold. The hospital room settled into a rhythm that felt both controlled and quietly revealing. Machines monitored what the body could not hide. Numbers appeared, fluctuated, stabilized, then shifted again. Nurses moved in and out with practiced efficiency, each interaction brief but purposeful. Blood had been drawn, samples labeled, questions asked and recorded. Clara Whitmore remained in the same chair near the wall. Her posture unchanged, her attention unwavering. She did not fidget. She did not reach for her phone to distract herself. She did not fill the silence with unnecessary words. She watched. Jeremiah lay in the hospital bed, the sharpness of his earlier composure dulled by physical discomfort and the slow erosion of control. His eyes were open more often now, though they carried a heaviness that had not been there that morning. His movements were minimal, calculated, as though any excess might worsen what he could not yet define. "Doctor," Melissa Grant returned after the initial tests had been processed. She stood at the foot of the bed, reviewing the chart in her hands before looking up at Jeremiah. "Mr. Whitmore," she began, her tone measured, "your vitals are stabilizing, which is good. However, some of your symptoms are not consistent with a typical fainting episode or dehydration." Jeremiah swallowed. "What does that mean?" "It means we're still determining the cause," she said. "There are indicators of a foreign substance in your system, but we need further analysis to be certain." The word foreign did not linger loudly in the room, but it settled with weight. Jeremiah's gaze shifted briefly toward Clara. She did not move. Dr. Grant continued, her focus clinical. "I need to ask you again. Have you ingested anything unusual in the past 24 hours? Any new medications, supplements, or foods?" "No," Jeremiah said, his voice tighter now. "Just normal meals. And the tea this morning?" "Yes." "Who prepared it?" Jeremiah hesitated. "I did." Clara noted the answer without reaction. Dr. Grant's expression remained neutral. "And your wife had the same tea?" Jeremiah's eyes flickered again. "Yes." Dr. Grant turned slightly toward Clara. "Mrs. Whitmore, you mentioned earlier that you also drank the tea and are not experiencing symptoms. Is that correct?" "That's correct," Clara said. Dr. Grant held her gaze for a moment, assessing. "Did you both drink from the same container?" Clara chose her words carefully. "The tea was prepared in the same kitchen," she said. "I cannot confirm whether the contents of the cups were identical." It was not an accusation. It was not a denial. It was a statement that preserved accuracy. Dr. Grant inclined her head slightly, acknowledging the precision. "All right," she said. We'll proceed with additional testing. She made a note in the chart, then addressed Jeremiah again. In the meantime, we'll keep you under observation. If anything changes, you need to tell us immediately. Jeremiah nodded. Dr. Grant exited the room, leaving behind a silence that felt different from before. Less neutral, more defined. Jeremiah turned his head toward Clara once the door closed. "You're making this sound like something it's not," he said, his voice low. Clara looked at him. "I described what happened," she replied. "That's not all you did." Her expression did not change. "What else would you like me to say?" Jeremiah exhaled sharply, then winced slightly as the movement seemed to aggravate his condition. "That I made a mistake, that something got mixed up, that it's nothing serious." Clara considered the words. "You said there was nothing unusual," she said. "That's because there wasn't," he insisted. "Then the tests will reflect that." The sentence was simple, but it removed something he had been relying on. Jeremiah looked away. Later that afternoon, Clara stepped out of the room briefly. Not to rest, not to escape, but to begin the next phase. The hospital hallway was quiet, lined with muted colors, and the soft echo of distant activity. Clara moved with the same measured pace she had maintained all day. Her attention focused inward, organizing information rather than reacting to it. She reached into her bag and removed her phone. There were messages, work emails, notifications, routine noise. She ignored them. Instead, she opened a secure email account she'd created weeks earlier, one not linked to her primary address, one that existed solely for documentation. She began drafting a message, subject preliminary record. She did not rush. Each sentence was deliberate. Date Tuesday. Time of incident, approximately 7:00 a.m. Location, residence kitchen. Observed behavior subject prepared tea. Observed outcome subject experienced acute onset of dizziness and instability after ingestion. Secondary observation, no symptoms present in self after ingestion from alternate cup. She paused, then attached images. Photographs she had taken earlier that morning before leaving the house. The cups, the placement, the containers. She had taken them quickly, quietly, without altering anything. She added them to the email. Then she saved it. Not sent yet. Not until the chain was complete. Clara returned to the room just as a nurse was finishing another set of checks. Jeremiah appeared more stable, though the tension in his posture remained. "How are you feeling?" Clara asked. It was the first time she had asked directly. "Better," he said. "They're overreacting." "Possibly," Clara replied. Her tone carried no agreement, no disagreement, just space. The nurse finished her notes and left. Again the room settled. That evening, as the light outside dimmed and the hospital quieted into its nighttime rhythm, Clara sat once more in her chair, her notebook now open in her lap. She wrote hospital admission. Symptoms confirmed by medical staff. Preliminary indication, foreign substance. Subject denies irregular ingestion. Inconsistency noted. She paused, then added, environmental control remains with subject at time of preparation. She closed the notebook. Jeremiah watched her. "You're writing this down?" he asked. "Yes." Why, Clara met his gaze. "So I don't forget." There was no challenge in her voice, no accusation, just truth. Jeremiah looked at her for a long moment, then away, because there was nothing in her expression he could argue with. What Jeremiah did not yet know, though the narrator understood fully, was that the pattern he believed he controlled had already extended beyond the walls of their home. Clara's observations were no longer isolated. They were being structured, preserved, prepared. And the world he had relied on to remain private was beginning slowly to open. Not through confrontation, not through noise, but through record. In another part of the hospital, Dr. Melissa Grant reviewed the initial lab results again. Her expression remained professional, but her attention sharpened. There were traces, not enough to conclude, but enough to question. She made a note to request further analysis, because cases like this, she knew, rarely revealed themselves all at once. They unfolded, piece by piece. Back in the room, Clara Whitmore sat in silence, not waiting, not hoping, but continuing exactly as she had begun, observing, recording, and allowing the truth to move forward on its own terms. By the second day, the hospital had shifted from uncertainty to structure. Clara Whitmore noticed it in the way questions became more specific, in the way staff members no longer spoke only in general terms, and in the quiet coordination that occurred behind closed doors. The language had changed. Where there had been possibilities, there were now directions. Where there had been observation, there was now intent. Jeremiah remained in the hospital bed, stabilized, but not discharged. His symptoms had lessened, though not entirely disappeared. The dizziness came in smaller waves, now the nausea controlled, but not gone. He spoke more clearly, but there was something beneath his voice that had not returned to its previous state. It was not just physical discomfort, it was calculation under pressure. Clara sat in the same place she had occupied since the day before. Her presence had not wavered. She did not move unnecessarily. She did not insert herself into conversations that did not require her. She remained as she always had, a fixed point. Late that morning, Dr. Melissa Grant returned with a folder in her hands. She closed the door behind her before speaking. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, her tone measured but firmer than before, "we've received some of your lab results." Jeremiah shifted slightly. "And there are traces of a compound in your system that we cannot attribute to standard food or medication." The sentence was clinical, but its meaning was not. Jeremiah's expression tightened. "What kind of compound? We're still confirming specifics," Dr. Grant replied. "But it is not something that appears naturally in the context you've described." Silence settled. Clara did not move. Dr. Grant continued her attention now, including both of them. "In situations like this, we are required to consider all possible sources of exposure. That includes accidental ingestion, environmental factors, and intentional introduction." The last phrase was not emphasized. It did not need to be. Jeremiah exhaled slowly. "That's not possible," he said. "There must be a mistake." "That is why we are verifying," Dr. Grant said. "But I need accurate information from you. Anything you may have overlooked matters." "I didn't overlook anything," Jeremiah insisted. Dr. Grant studied him for a moment, then shifted her gaze to Clara. "Mrs. Whitmore, I'd like to ask you a few additional questions, if that's all right." "Of course," Clara said. Dr. Grant gestured toward the hallway. "Privately." Clara stood without hesitation. She followed the doctor out of the room, the door closing softly behind them. The hallway was quiet, insulated from the conversations inside the rooms. Dr. Grant did not speak immediately. She walked a few steps, ensuring distance, then turned to face Clara. "I need to be very clear," she said. "What we are seeing is not consistent with a simple medical event." Clara nodded once. "I understand." "Have there been any recent changes in your household? New substances, cleaning products, medications, anything that might explain this?" Clara considered the question. "There have been changes," she said. Dr. Grant waited. "Specifically related to what food preparation?" Clara replied. "And beverages." Dr. Grant's expression sharpened slightly. "Can you elaborate?" Clara chose her words with precision. "There have been instances where the taste of tea differed from its usual profile," she said, "accompanied by mild symptoms in myself on prior occasions." Dr. Grant absorbed this. "You've experienced symptoms before, yes. Did you seek medical attention? Non point. Why not?" "Because the symptoms were not severe at the time," Clara said, "and because I was still determining whether they were isolated." Dr. Grant nodded slowly. "Have you documented these occurrences? Yes?" The answer came without hesitation. "Do you still have those records?" "Yes." Dr. Grant held her gaze for a moment, then spoke more quietly. Mrs. Whitmore, based on what we're seeing there, is a possibility that this involves intentional exposure to a harmful substance. Clara did not react outwardly. I understand, she said. If that is the case, Dr. Grant continued, we are obligated to escalate this. That may involve hospital administration and potentially law enforcement. Clara inclined her head slightly. What would you need from me? Any documentation you have, Dr. Grant said. And a clear account of events leading up to this incident. Clara considered this. I can provide that, she said. Dr. Grant nodded. I would advise you not to confront your husband directly about this, she added. At least not until we have more information. Clara's expression remained unchanged. I haven't, she said. Dr. Grant studied her again as though recognizing something in the restraint. That's good, she said. We'll proceed carefully. Clara returned to the room a few minutes later. Jeremiah looked at her immediately. What did she say, he asked. That they're continuing tests, Clara replied. It was true. It was not complete. Jeremiah watched her, searching for something beyond the words. You were gone a while, he said. I answered her questions. What kind of questions about the past few days? Jeremiah's jaw tightened slightly, and Clara met his gaze. And I answered them. There was no elaboration, no invitation. Jeremiah looked away. That afternoon, Clara left the hospital briefly, not for long, just enough. She returned home alone. The house was exactly as it had been left. The kitchen remained undisturbed. Clara moved through it slowly, her attention focused not on what was visible, but on what could be preserved. She took out her phone, photographed the tea containers again, opened the cabinet, photographed the interior. She retrieved the glass vials she had prepared the night before, checked the seals, unbroken. She placed them carefully into a small padded envelope. Then she sat at the table and opened her second notebook, the one labeled for controlled observations. She added a new entry. Hospital confirmation of foreign compound. Medical escalation initiated. Documentation requested. She paused, then added physical samples secured. She closed the notebook. Before leaving, Clara did one more thing. She logged into the joint financial account, not because she expected to find immediate answers, but because patterns rarely existed in isolation. The numbers loaded slowly. Balances, transactions, transfers. At first glance, everything appeared consistent, but Clara did not look at the surface. She looked at movement, at timing, at repetition. There it was, a series of transfers over the past 3 months. Not large enough to trigger alerts, not small enough to be insignificant. Directed to an account she did not recognize. Clara noted the account number, the dates, the amounts. She did not act on it, not yet. She recorded it. When she returned to the hospital, evening had begun to settle in again. Jeremiah was awake, watching the door. You left, he said. Yes. Where home? For what? To get a few things. Jeremiah studied her. You didn't tell me. I didn't think it was necessary. The answer was simple. Unemotional. Jeremiah exhaled slowly. Something in his expression shifted again. Not anger, not yet. But the absence of control was becoming more visible. Clara took her seat, opened her notebook, not to write, just to have it present. A constant. Jeremiah watched her for a moment longer, then turned his gaze away. What neither of them said, though it existed clearly in the space between them, was that the situation had moved beyond what either of them could contain privately. The hospital had begun its process. Clara had begun hers. And Jeremiah, whether he admitted it or not, was now inside both. Outside the room, Dr. Melissa Grant spoke quietly with another staff member, her tone low, her words precise. There would be further tests, additional verification, and if the results aligned as expected, the next step would not remain within the hospital. Inside, Clara Whitmore sat in silence, her hands resting lightly on the notebook, her attention steady, her record intact. She did not need to accelerate anything, because the truth once structured had its own momentum, and it was already moving. By the third day, the situation had acquired a shape that could no longer be mistaken for coincidence. Clara Whitmore recognized this not through a single revelation, but through accumulation. Each element that had once stood alone now aligned with others, forming a structure that no longer required interpretation. The hospital had done what it was designed to do. It had measured, it had compared, it had eliminated what did not fit. What remained was not yet spoken plainly, but it was no longer uncertain. Jeremiah Whitmore sensed it as well. He did not name it because naming it would require acknowledging the path that had led there. Instead, he focused on smaller things: the timing of nurse visits, the rhythm of test results, the way conversations paused when he spoke, as though something unspoken hovered just beyond reach. Clara remained consistent. She arrived early. She left briefly. She returned. She sat in the same chair. She listened. She recorded. She did not fill the silence. And because she did not, the silence began to speak for itself. That morning, a different presence entered the room. He was not dressed like medical staff. No scrubs, no stethoscope. His posture carried a different kind of authority. Less immediate, more deliberate. "Mr. Whitmore," he said, stepping inside after a soft knock. "I'm Detective Ryan Cole." The name did not echo loudly, but it altered the room. Jeremiah's eyes narrowed slightly. "A detective," he said. Why Detective Cole did not answer immediately. He closed the door behind him, then moved a few steps into the room, positioning himself where both Clara and Jeremiah were within view. "We've been asked to follow up on a medical report," he said. "There are some questions regarding your condition." Jeremiah exhaled sharply. "This is unnecessary," he said. "I told the doctor everything." "I'm sure you did," Cole replied evenly. "I just need to go over a few details." Clara watched the exchange without moving. She noted the tone, the pacing, the absence of urgency in the detective's voice, which in itself suggested that the urgency existed elsewhere already documented. "Can you tell me what happened yesterday morning?" Cole asked. Jeremiah shifted slightly in the bed. "I was in my kitchen. I had tea. I felt dizzy." "That's it? Did you prepare the tea yourself?" "Yes." "Did anyone else have access to it before you drank it?" Cole nodded slowly. "And your wife?" "She had tea too." "From the same preparation?" Jeremiah hesitated. "Yes." Clara did not look at him. She looked at the detective. Cole's gaze moved briefly toward her, then back to Jeremiah. "And she experienced no symptoms," he said. That's what she said. The phrasing was subtle, but it carried distance. Cole acknowledged it with a slight nod. "Have there been any recent issues at home?" he asked. "Anything out of the ordinary, no." "Any financial stress, work-related pressure?" Jeremiah's jaw tightened. "That's not relevant." "It might be," Cole said. Jeremiah did not respond. The detective turned slightly toward Clara. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, "would you be willing to share your account of what happened?" Clara met his gaze. "Yes." She spoke clearly without hesitation. "I entered the kitchen after my husband had prepared tea," she said. "We each had a cup. He began experiencing symptoms shortly after drinking. I did not." "Did you observe anything unusual about the preparation?" Clara paused. "His movements were deliberate," she said, "more so than typical routine." Cole waited. The taste of the tea had differed from previous instances in the days leading up to this. "Previous instances?" Cole asked. "Yes." Clara reached into her bag and removed her notebook. "I have documented those," she said. She handed it to him. Cole took it carefully, flipping through the pages. His expression did not change, but his attention sharpened. Dates, times, symptoms, consistency. No speculation, only record. He closed the notebook. "This is thorough," he said. Clara inclined her head slightly. "I wanted accuracy." Cole looked at her for a moment longer, then nodded. "Thank you." Jeremiah watched the exchange, something tightening in his expression. "You've been writing all this down," he said. Clara turned to him. "Yes." "Why?" "So I wouldn't rely on memory." Jeremiah exhaled slowly. "That's not normal." Clara did not respond, because the statement did not require one. Detective Cole stepped slightly to the side, creating space, but not removing himself from the conversation. "There's another matter I'd like to clarify," he said. He reached into a folder he had been carrying and removed a printed sheet. "Mr. Whitmore, are you familiar with this account?" He held it up. Jeremiah's eyes flicked toward it. For a moment there was nothing. Then recognition. Brief, controlled, but present. "It's just an investment account," Jeremiah said. "Not listed among your primary disclosures," Cole replied. "That doesn't mean anything." "It might not," Cole said. "But the timing of certain transfers aligns with the period your wife has documented symptoms." Silence followed. Clara did not move. Jeremiah looked at the paper again, then away. "You're connecting things that aren't related," he said. "That's what we're here to determine," Cole replied. Later that afternoon, after the detective had left the room, felt different. Not louder, not more tense, but defined. Jeremiah no longer attempted to control the conversation. He remained quiet for longer periods, his attention turning inward, recalculating, reassessing. Clara continued as she had. She opened her notebook, added a new entry. Law enforcement engaged. Detective Ryan Cole. Financial records introduced. Subject response evasive. She closed it. That evening, Clara sat alone in the hospital cafeteria for a brief period. Not to rest, to organize. She opened her phone and accessed the secure email again. This time, she attached more files. The photographs, the notes, the timeline. She added a new section. Financial correlation, unidentified account. Transfers over 3-month period. Dates align with documented symptoms. She saved the draft. Still not sending. Not until every piece was in place. Back in the room, Jeremiah lay still, his gaze fixed on the ceiling. He did not ask where Clara had gone. He did not ask what she was doing. Because he had begun to understand something fundamental. The situation was no longer contained within his version of events. It had expanded, structured, recorded, and moved into systems that did not rely on his control. When Clara returned, she resumed her place. No announcement, no explanation, just presence. Jeremiah turned his head slightly. "Clara," he said. She looked at him. "If this is some kind of misunderstanding." He stopped. Because the sentence did not complete itself. Because there was no version of it that held. Clara held his gaze. "I've written down what happened," she said. "Nothing more." Outside, the process continued. Evidence reviewed. Reports filed. Questions prepared. The case, though not yet named, had begun to exist beyond the people directly involved in it. Inside the room, Clara Whitmore remained exactly as she had been from the beginning. Observing, recording, allowing each piece to settle into place. She did not need to force the outcome, because the structure was already forming. And once formed, it would speak clearly enough on its own. By the time Jeremiah Whitmore was discharged from the hospital, the structure surrounding him had already shifted beyond his control, even if he had not fully accepted it. The discharge itself was handled with clinical neutrality. His vitals had stabilized. The immediate physical danger had passed. The doctors could not justify keeping him longer without conclusive lab confirmation, though the investigation remained open. Dr. Melissa Grant had explained this in careful language, emphasizing follow-up testing caution and the importance of avoiding any unknown substances. Jeremiah had nodded through it all. Clara had listened. Neither of them had interrupted. When they returned home, the house looked exactly as it always had. That more than anything unsettled Jeremiah. The same kitchen, the same counter, the same cabinets, everything intact, nothing visibly altered. And yet something fundamental had changed. Clara entered first, placing her bag in its usual spot. She removed her shoes, aligned them beside the door, and moved through the house with the same quiet precision she had always carried. Jeremiah followed a step behind. He paused in the kitchen. His eyes moved across the counter, landing briefly on the space where the cups had been that morning. There were no cups now, no tea, no immediate reminder, only absence. "You didn't clean anything?" he asked. Clara turned slightly. "I didn't need to." The answer was simple, unemotional. Jeremiah nodded, though the response did not settle anything. The first evening back unfolded in a version of normal that felt constructed rather than natural. Clara prepared dinner. Not tea, not anything Jeremiah had previously controlled. She moved through the process methodically, measuring ingredients, using only items she had personally handled. Every action was deliberate, though it did not appear so on the surface. Jeremiah sat at the table watching intermittently, his attention divided between the routine in front of him and something internal he had not yet resolved. "You don't have to do all that," he said at one point. Clara did not look up. "It's dinner," she replied. "That's not what I meant." She placed a plate in front of him. "I know." No further explanation followed. They ate in silence for several minutes. The sound of utensils against ceramic filled the space. Jeremiah took a bite, then another. Nothing happened. No dizziness, no nausea, just food. He exhaled quietly. "You're being careful," he said. Clara set her fork down. "I'm being consistent. With what? With what I can verify." Jeremiah looked at her. "And what exactly is that?" Clara met his gaze. "What I prepare myself." The statement was clear, not aggressive, not defensive, just defined. Jeremiah leaned back slightly in his chair. "So you think I did something?" he said. Clara did not respond immediately. She picked up her fork again, finished her bite, then set it down. "I'm documenting what happened," she said. "That's not an answer. It's the only one that matters right now." Jeremiah's expression tightened. "You're turning this into something it's not." Clara tilted her head slightly. "Then the record will show that." The words were quiet, but they removed any space for argument. Because they did not claim, they deferred. And in that deferral, they placed the burden elsewhere. That night, Jeremiah remained awake longer than usual. Clara could hear him moving in the living room, the faint sound of his phone, the occasional shift of furniture as he paced without realizing it. She did not go to him. She did not ask what he was doing. She remained in the bedroom, reviewing her notes. She opened the second notebook, the structured one. She added, "Return to residence. Subject behavior, increased agitation. Verbal response, defensive nonspecific. Environmental control, self-maintained." She closed the notebook, set it beside her, turned off the light. The next morning, the pattern did not resume. Jeremiah did not go to the kitchen first. He remained in the bedroom longer than usual, as though waiting for Clara to initiate the routine. Clara did not. She woke at her usual time, dressed, prepared her own breakfast, coffee, not tea. She placed the cup on the counter and drank it slowly, her movements unchanged. Jeremiah entered the kitchen halfway through. He stopped when he saw her already there. "You didn't wake me," he said. "You were sleeping. You usually do." Clara looked at him. "I didn't think it was necessary." The phrase repeated. It carried more weight now. Jeremiah stepped further into the room. "You're avoiding me," he said. "No, Clara," Gordon replied. "I'm adjusting. To what I can confirm." Again, the same structure, the same logic. Jeremiah exhaled sharply. "You keep saying that like it explains everything. It explains enough." "For who? For me?" The answer settled between them, not as a resolution, but as a boundary. Later that day, Clara left for work as she normally would. Her routine did not change. Her posture did not shift. Her external life remained intact. Inside, however, the structure continued to expand. During her lunch break, she accessed the secure email again. This time, she finalized the draft. She reviewed each section carefully. Timeline, medical records, photographic evidence, financial data, behavioral observations. No speculation, no accusation, only alignment. She added one final line, requesting formal review and preservation of evidence. Then she entered the recipient, Naomi Keller, the attorney she had identified days earlier but had not yet contacted. Clara read the email once more. Then she sent it. Back at home, Jeremiah remained inside the house for most of the day. He moved between rooms without purpose, opening cabinets, checking drawers, picking up objects, and setting them down again. He returned to the kitchen multiple times. Each time he looked at the same spaces, the counter, the cabinet, the kettle, as though trying to locate the moment where something had shifted. But the moment was not there. Because it had never been in the object. It had been in the pattern, and the pattern was no longer his. That evening, when Clara returned, nothing had been disturbed. The house was intact. Jeremiah was seated at the table, waiting. "We need to talk," he said. Clara set her bag down. "Yes," she replied, "we do." She did not sit immediately. She moved to the kitchen, poured herself a glass of water, then turned back to him. "What would you like to discuss?" she asked. Jeremiah leaned forward. "This situation," he said. "What you're implying." Clara walked to the table and sat across from him. "I'm not implying anything," she said. "Then what are you doing?" "I'm documenting." Jeremiah shook his head. "That's the same thing." "No," Clara said. "It isn't." She held his gaze. "Implication is interpretation," she continued. "Documentation is record." Jeremiah's hands tightened slightly on the edge of the table. "And what happens when your record is wrong?" Clara did not look away. "Then it will be corrected." And if it isn't, Clara paused, not because she needed time to think, but because the answer required precision. "Then it won't be my decision anymore." The sentence ended the conversation, not because Jeremiah accepted it, but because there was no argument that could dismantle it without stepping into something he was not prepared to face. That night, the house remained quiet. No raised voices, no confrontation, only distance, defined, measured, irreversible. Clara Whitmore lay awake for a few minutes longer than usual, not restless, not uncertain, simply aware that the process had moved into its next phase. The record was no longer hers alone. It had been shared, structured, and placed into a system that did not rely on silence to exist. She closed her eyes and let the quiet remain. The reply from Naomi Keller arrived the next morning at 6:12 a.m. Clara Whitmore read it once while standing in the kitchen, her coffee untouched on the counter. Then she read it again, more slowly parsing not just the words, but the structure behind them. Naomi's tone was direct, professional, and notably restrained. She did not express shock. She did not speculate. She did not ask unnecessary questions. She acknowledged receipt of the materials. She confirmed that the documentation was consistent, chronological, and legally useful. She requested a meeting. And she advised one thing above all else: do not alter your routine in a way that signals escalation. Clara closed the email. That instruction aligned with everything she had already been doing. Jeremiah entered the kitchen a few minutes later. He looked at the coffee in Clara's hand, then at the counter, as though searching for something that was no longer there. "You're not making tea anymore," he said. Clara took a sip of coffee. "No. For how long? For now." Jeremiah nodded slowly. "That's not normal for you." Clara set the cup down. "It's a preference. It's a change." "Yes." Jeremiah watched her. "And you don't think that's connected to what's going on?" Clara met his gaze. "It is connected," she said. At least that much was direct. Jeremiah leaned against the counter. "So you admit that? I'm not denying anything, except what you think I did." Clara did not respond, because the sentence required her to accept a premise she had not stated. Jeremiah exhaled sharply. "You're building something," he said. "I can see it." Clara remained still. "Yes," she said. The honesty of the answer seemed to unsettle him more than denial would have. For what he asked, for clarity. Jeremiah let out a short, humorless laugh. "That's not what this is." Clara picked up her cup again. "It will be," she said. Later that day, Clara met Naomi Keller in a quiet office building downtown. Naomi's office reflected her approach. Minimalist, organized. No excess decoration, no unnecessary warmth. The space was built for function, for clarity, for precision. Naomi herself was in her early 40s, composed, attentive, and notably efficient in both speech and movement. She did not waste time establishing rapport. She did not soften her language to make it more comfortable. She began with the facts. "I've reviewed everything you sent," she said, placing a printed copy of Clara's documentation on the desk between them. "It's structured well. That matters." Clara nodded. "I wanted it to be usable." "It is," Naomi said. She flipped through a few pages, stopping at specific entries. "Your notes are consistent. You avoided speculation. That's good. It keeps the record clean." Naomi looked up. "What you have here is not proof of intent yet," she continued, "but it is a strong foundation for establishing pattern, opportunity, and discrepancy." Clara listened without interrupting. "What happens next?" she asked. Naomi folded her hands. "That depends on how far this goes," she said. "Right now, there are 3 parallel tracks." She raised a finger. "Medical. The hospital is already documenting exposure." A second finger. "Criminal. Law enforcement has begun preliminary inquiry." A third. "Civil. That's where I come in." Clara remained still. Naomi continued. "We can file for protective measures, financial separation, controlled access to shared assets, and if necessary, initiate divorce proceedings." The word divorce did not land heavily. It was simply another step. Clara considered it. "Not yet," she said. Naomi nodded. "That's reasonable." She leaned slightly forward. "But understand this. Timing matters. The stronger your documentation becomes, the more options you have. But waiting too long can create risk." Clara held her gaze. "I'm not waiting passively," she said. Naomi allowed the smallest hint of acknowledgement. "I can see that." She reached for another document. "These," she said, indicating the printed bank records Clara had included, "are significant." Clara looked at them. "The account isn't disclosed." Naomi continued. "The transfers are patterned. That suggests intent, not accident." "Can it be accessed?" Clara asked. "Eventually," Naomi said, "with the right filings." She paused. "For now, we document, we preserve, we don't confront." Clara nodded. "That's consistent with what I've been doing." Naomi studied her for a moment. "You've been very controlled," she said. "Yes, that's an advantage. Don't lose it." When Clara returned home that evening, Jeremiah was in the living room. He stood when she entered. "Where were you?" he asked. "Work," she said. "After work." Clara set her bag down. "I had a meeting." "With who?" "A lawyer." The word landed clearly. Jeremiah's expression shifted. "You're serious," he said. "Yes." For what exactly? Clara turned to face him fully. For what's already in motion. Jeremiah took a step closer. "You think I tried to hurt you?" he said. Clara did not answer immediately. She allowed the sentence to exist without interruption. Then she said, "I've documented what happened." "That's not the same thing. It's the only thing that matters right now." Jeremiah shook his head. "No, what matters is what actually happened." Clara held his gaze. "That's what the record is for." Jeremiah's frustration surfaced more clearly now. "This is out of control," he said. "You're turning this into something legal when it doesn't need to be." Clara's expression did not change. "It already is," she said. "You don't even know what they're going to find." "No," Clara said. "But I know what I've observed." "And you think that's enough?" Clara paused. "Yes," she said. That night, the distance between them became structural. Not emotional, not reactive, defined. Jeremiah did not attempt further conversation. Clara did not initiate one. The house remained quiet. In her room, Clara opened her notebook again. She added a new entry. Legal counsel engaged. Naomi Keller. Strategy documentation preservation non-confrontation. Financial irregularities confirmed as relevant. She paused, then added, subject aware of escalation. She closed the notebook. Downstairs, Jeremiah sat alone. The house that had once been predictable now felt unfamiliar. Not because anything had changed physically, but because the pattern he had relied on no longer responded to him. He looked at his phone, at his accounts, at messages left unanswered, at a system that had begun to shift beyond his reach. Upstairs, Clara Whitmore turned off the light, not because she was finished, but because everything that needed to begin already had. The legal process did not begin with confrontation. It began with separation. Not physical, not yet, but structural. Clara Whitmore understood that the most effective changes were the ones that did not announce themselves immediately. They unfolded through systems, through documents, through quiet adjustments that altered control without appearing to do so. Naomi Keller had been clear about that. You don't escalate through emotion, she had said during their meeting. You escalate through structure. Clara followed that instruction precisely. 2 days after their meeting, the first formal step was taken. Naomi filed for a temporary financial review under joint asset protection. It was not aggressive on its surface. It did not accuse. It did not declare wrongdoing. It simply requested oversight. But oversight in this context meant scrutiny. And scrutiny meant exposure. Jeremiah Whitmore felt it before he saw it. The notification appeared on his phone late in the afternoon. A routine alert at first glance. An internal review request tied to one of the joint accounts. He opened it, read it once, then again. His posture shifted. He stood up from the chair in the living room, pacing once across the space, then stopping as though movement itself had become insufficient. Clara was in the kitchen, not preparing tea, never tea. She was organizing documents, aligning papers into a folder Naomi had instructed her to maintain physically, not just digitally. Jeremiah entered the room with the phone still in his hand. "What is this?" he asked. Clara did not look up immediately. She placed one sheet into the folder, adjusted it so that the edges aligned perfectly, then closed the cover. Only then did she turn. "It's a review request," she said. "For what? For joint accounts?" Jeremiah stared at her. "You initiated this?" "Yes, without telling me." Clara held his gaze. It didn't require prior discussion. Jeremiah let out a short, disbelieving breath. "It absolutely does." "No," Clara said. "It doesn't." The calm in her voice did not soften the impact. It clarified it. Jeremiah stepped closer. "You're locking me out of my own accounts," he said. "I'm not locking anything," Clara replied. "I'm documenting access." "That's the same thing." "It isn't." Jeremiah shook his head. "You don't even understand what you're doing." Clara's expression remained unchanged. "I understand enough." For what he demanded, for accountability. The words settled between them, not as accusation, as definition. Jeremiah turned away, running a hand through his hair before looking back at her. "This is going too far," he said. "There's no proof of anything." Clara did not respond immediately. She reached for the folder again, opened it, removed a single page, placed it on the counter between them. "Then the review will confirm that," she said. Jeremiah looked at the page. Bank records, dates, transfers. The account number he had not disclosed. His eyes moved across the lines, recognition tightening his expression. "This is normal," he said. "It's part of my work. It's not listed in our disclosures. That doesn't mean it's wrong." Clara nodded once. That's what the process will determine. Later that evening, another step unfolded. Quietly, without announcement, Naomi filed a preliminary request for restricted access to certain joint assets pending review. Again, it was not aggressive. It was framed as precautionary, but the effect was immediate. Jeremiah attempted to move funds that night. The system did not allow it. He tried again. The same result. A delay notice, a verification requirement. He stared at the screen for a long moment, then set the phone down more forcefully than necessary. Across the room, Clara sat at the table, her notebook open. She wrote, "Financial review initiated. Subject response agitation attempted transfer blocked. System intervention active." She closed the notebook. The next development came from outside the house. Detective Ryan Cole requested a formal follow-up interview. Not at the hospital, not in passing, at the station. The request was delivered with professional neutrality. Jeremiah read the message twice, then a third time. Clara saw it when he placed his phone on the table. She did not comment. He looked at her. "You knew about this," he said. "Yes, you're coordinating this. I'm cooperating." Jeremiah exhaled slowly. "That's not the same thing." Clara met his gaze. "It is in this context." The interview was scheduled for the following morning. Jeremiah prepared for it in the only way he knew how. He reviewed his own narrative, repeated it, refined it, removed inconsistencies, replaced them with cleaner explanations. But the structure he built now had to account for something new. Records he did not control. Clara did not prepare in the same way. She reviewed her notes, not to change them, to ensure they remained exactly as they were. At the station, Detective Cole conducted the interview in a room designed for clarity rather than comfort. No distractions, no unnecessary elements, just a table, 2 chairs, and a recorder. Jeremiah sat across from him. Clara was not present, but her documentation was. Cole placed the notebook on the table, opened it. "We're going to go through this step by step," he said. Jeremiah nodded. The questions were precise. Dates, times, actions. Each answer Jeremiah gave was compared against something already written. Where they aligned, the process moved forward. Where they did not, the pause was noticeable. Not dramatic, but significant. At one point, Cole tapped lightly on a page. "On this date," he said, "your wife noted symptoms after consuming tea you prepared." Jeremiah shifted slightly. "That doesn't mean anything." "On this date," Cole continued, "there was a transfer from your undisclosed account." Jeremiah's jaw tightened. "That's unrelated. That's what we're determining." The interview lasted longer than Jeremiah expected, because it was not about what he said. It was about how what he said fit into what already existed. Back at home, Clara waited, not anxiously, not impatiently. She sat at the table, her notebook closed in front of her, her hands resting lightly on its cover. When Jeremiah returned, he did not speak immediately. He set his keys down, stood for a moment, then said, "They already have everything." Clara looked at him. "They have enough to ask the right questions." Jeremiah let out a quiet, strained breath. "This isn't over," he said. "No," Clara replied. "It isn't." That night, the house felt different again. Not because of raised voices, not because of conflict, but because the process had moved beyond the point where either of them could contain it privately. The systems were active now: financial, legal, investigative. Each one operating on its own track, each one reinforcing the others. Clara opened her notebook one more time before going to bed. She added, "Formal interview conducted. Subject response defensive inconsistent. Cross-reference with records initiated." She paused, then added, "Process fully externalized." She closed the notebook. Upstairs, Jeremiah sat alone in the dark, the house around him unchanged, but the structure within it no longer his. Clara turned off the light, not because anything had ended, but because everything had moved into a place where it would continue without her needing to push it forward. The conversation did not happen because either of them wanted it. It happened because the structure surrounding them had narrowed to a point where silence no longer served the same function it once had. Clara Whitmore understood this before Jeremiah did. By the end of the week, the house had become a space defined less by routine and more by alignment. Every object remained where it had always been, but the meaning attached to each space had shifted. The kitchen was no longer neutral. The living room was no longer shared. Even the hallway carried a quiet awareness that something had already moved beyond repair. Jeremiah felt it, though he did not articulate it clearly. Clara observed it and recorded it without naming it. That evening, Jeremiah initiated the conversation. He stood in the doorway of the dining room where Clara sat with her notebook closed in front of her, her hands resting lightly on either side of it. She was not writing. She had not been for several minutes. She was simply present as she had been throughout the entire process. "We need to stop this," he said. Clara looked up at him. "Stop what?" "This," he repeated, gesturing vaguely, as though the structure itself could be dismissed by the absence of a precise definition. Clara's expression remained unchanged. "The process is already in motion," she said. "You can stop it," Jeremiah insisted. "You can tell them it was a misunderstanding." Clara held his gaze. "I can't." "Yes, you can," he said, stepping further into the room. "You're the one who started it." Clara did not correct him. She did not need to. "I documented what happened," she said. "That's not the same thing," Jeremiah replied, his voice tightening. "You made it into something else." Clara tilted her head slightly. "I didn't add anything," she said. "I didn't remove anything." "That's not true," he said quickly. "You chose what to write down." "Yes, and that changes things." Clara paused, then spoke with careful precision. "It reveals things." Jeremiah exhaled sharply, running a hand across his face before lowering it again. "You think this proves something," he said. "But it doesn't. It's just fragments, pieces that don't mean anything on their own." Clara listened. "They don't need to," she said. "They do," Jeremiah insisted, "because that's what this is built on. You're connecting things that aren't connected." Clara remained still. "They are connected," she said, "according to you, according to the record." Jeremiah shook his head. "That's the same thing, no?" Clara replied, "It isn't." The silence that followed was heavier than the ones before, not because of emotion, but because of clarity. Jeremiah took another step forward. "You never asked me," he said. Clara's eyes remained on him. "Asked you what if something was wrong," he said. "If I needed help, if there was anything going on." Clara considered the words. "I observed what was happening," she said. "That's not the same as asking." "No." Clara agreed. "It isn't." "Then why didn't you?" he pressed. Clara's answer came without hesitation. "Because I needed the answer to be consistent." Jeremiah frowned. "What does that even mean?" "It means I needed to see if what I was observing would continue without interference." Jeremiah stared at her. "So you just watched?" "Yes." "And wrote it down?" "Yes." He let out a short, incredulous laugh. "That's not normal, Clara." She did not respond to the word normal, because it had no relevance to what had already occurred. Jeremiah moved to the table, placing both hands against its surface as he leaned slightly forward. "You switched the cups," he said. The sentence landed in the room with more weight than anything else he had said. Clara did not react immediately. She allowed the words to settle. Then she said, "Yes." Jeremiah's jaw tightened. "So, you admit that?" "I documented it." "That's not documentation," he said. "That's action." Clara held his gaze. "It was necessary. for what he demanded. For verification, Jeremiah straightened slightly, his expression shifting from frustration to something more focused. "You did that on purpose," he said. "You set that up." Clara did not deny it. "I needed to confirm the pattern," she said. "You could have hurt me." Clara's voice remained even. "I called an ambulance. That doesn't change what you did. It preserves what happened." Jeremiah stared at her, searching for something in her expression that might resemble hesitation, regret, or uncertainty. He found none. "You're trying to make this look like I did something intentional," he said. Clara did not interrupt. "But you don't have anything that proves that," he continued. "Not really. Just notes, observations, interpretations." Clara listened until he finished. Then she spoke. "I have consistency," she said. "That's not proof. It's structure." Jeremiah shook his head. "That doesn't mean anything in court." Clara's expression remained unchanged. "It does." The certainty in her voice did not rise. It did not need to. It existed in the absence of doubt. Jeremiah stepped back slightly, as though creating distance might restore some sense of control. "You think you've built something solid," he said. "But it's fragile. One mistake, one inconsistency, and it falls apart." Clara considered that. "That's why I avoided both," she said. Another silence. Longer this time. Jeremiah looked at her differently now. Not as someone he could redirect, not as someone he could outpace, but as something he had underestimated. "You planned this," he said quietly. Clara did not answer immediately, because the word plan implied something different from what she had done. "I responded," she said. Jeremiah exhaled slowly. "And what happens now?" Clara's hands remained resting on the notebook. "That depends on what the records show," she said. "They already show what you want them to show." Clara shook her head slightly. "They show what was recorded. And you think that's objective?" "Yes." Jeremiah let out a quiet, strained breath. "You don't even hear yourself," he said. Clara did not respond. Because she did. He stood there for a moment longer, as though waiting for something to shift. It didn't. Finally, Jeremiah stepped back. Not retreating, but disengaging. Because the conversation had reached a point where it no longer served him. Clara remained seated. She did not reopen the notebook. She did not write, not immediately. She allowed the moment to settle, to exist fully before being reduced to record. Later that night, she added a new entry. Subject acknowledges cup switch. Frames action as intent. Attempts to redefine pattern as interpretation. Response maintained structure. She paused, then added, "Subject recognizes loss of control." She closed the notebook. Upstairs, Jeremiah lay awake. Not because of physical discomfort, but because the narrative he had relied on no longer held. Clara turned off the light. The conversation had not resolved anything. It had clarified everything. And that more than resolution was what the process required. The filing did not arrive with noise. There was no raised voice, no sudden confrontation, no moment where everything fractured visibly in front of witnesses. It came in the form of documents, structured, indexed, time-stamped. Clara Whitmore received the confirmation from Naomi Keller at 8:03 a.m. Filed. One word. It carried more weight than anything Jeremiah had said in the past week. Clara read the message once, then placed her phone face down on the kitchen counter. She did not react outwardly. She did not allow the moment to expand beyond what it was. A step, not an ending. The documents themselves moved through the system quickly. A petition for divorce had been submitted under grounds that did not rely on emotional argument. It referenced conduct risk and the need for separation under documented conditions. Alongside it, Naomi had filed for a protective order and a request for financial control review, supported by the records Clara had compiled. There were attachments, medical summaries, transaction logs, dated entries, audio transcripts from recorded conversations that had been obtained legally under Naomi's guidance. Nothing excessive, nothing speculative. Only what could be verified. Clara Whitmore received notice just before noon. He was in his office when the email came through, followed shortly by a call he did not answer. The subject line was neutral. The content was not. He read the first page, then the second, then stopped. His hand remained on the desk, fingers resting against the surface without moving. The office around him continued as normal. Phones rang in the distance. Conversations passed by the door. Someone laughed at something unrelated. None of it reached him, because the structure he had been trying to hold together had now been formalized without his participation. At home, Clara continued her routine. She did not wait for Jeremiah. She did not check the time more frequently than usual. She prepared her own meal, reviewed a set of documents Naomi had sent for acknowledgement, signed where required, dated everything. At 2:17 p.m., she added a new entry to her notebook. Legal filing confirmed. Divorce petition submitted. Protective order requested. Financial oversight active. She paused, then added, documentation transferred to formal system. She closed the notebook. Jeremiah returned home earlier than usual. The door opened with more force than necessary, though not enough to be called aggressive. It was controlled, but only just. Clara was in the living room, seated. The notebook was not in her hands this time. Her posture remained the same. Jeremiah stood in the doorway for a moment before stepping inside fully. "You filed," he said. Clara looked at him. Yes. The word did not carry emphasis. It did not need to. Jeremiah let out a breath that was closer to a laugh than anything else. "You didn't even talk to me," he said. Clara considered that. "I spoke with counsel," she replied. "That's not what I meant. I know." Jeremiah moved further into the room. "This is a mistake," he said. "You're taking something incomplete and turning it into something permanent." Clara met his gaze. "I'm formalizing what's already documented." "That's not the same thing. It is in this context." Jeremiah shook his head. "No, it isn't. Because once this is filed, it changes everything." Clara's expression remained unchanged. "It already has." Jeremiah looked at her, searching again for hesitation, for doubt, for anything that suggested this could still be redirected. "You don't have proof," he said. Clara did not respond immediately. Then she said, "The court will determine that. You're avoiding the question. I'm placing it where it belongs." Jeremiah exhaled sharply. "This is exactly what I meant," he said. "You're not even engaging with reality anymore." Clara's voice remained steady. "I am." "No, you're not," he insisted. "You're hiding behind paperwork." Clara shook her head slightly. "I'm relying on it." Jeremiah stepped closer, his voice lowering. "You think this makes you safe?" he said. "It doesn't. It just makes things worse." Clara held his gaze. "It makes things clear." "That's not the same." "It is for me." The conversation did not escalate beyond that. Not because Jeremiah accepted it, but because there was no entry point left for argument that did not lead directly into the structure he was trying to avoid. Over the next few days, the consequences began to appear. Not all at once, not dramatically, but consistently. The financial accounts were reviewed more closely. Access was not removed, but it was monitored. Requests required additional verification. Transfers were flagged. Jeremiah received calls from colleagues who had been notified of irregularities. Not accusations, just inquiries. Careful, professional, distant. Alyssa Munro stopped responding to his messages. At first, there was a delay, then silence, then absence. Clara did not follow any of it actively. She did not reach out. She did not check his phone. She did not search for confirmation. Because everything that mattered was already within the system she had engaged. The protective order was processed shortly after. It did not remove Jeremiah from the house immediately, but it defined boundaries, clear ones, no interference with Clara's personal space, no access to her devices, no attempt to alter or remove shared documentation. It was structured in a way that prevented escalation rather than reacting to it. One evening, as the light outside faded into a quiet gray, Clara began packing. Not everything. Only what was necessary. Documents, clothing, personal items. She moved through the house with the same precision she had always shown, selecting only what she could account for, what she could carry without disruption. Jeremiah stood in the hallway, watching. "You're leaving," he said. "Yes, when tomorrow?" Jeremiah nodded slowly. "And that's it?" Clara paused, holding a folder in her hands. "That's the next step." Jeremiah looked at the bag on the bed. "You're not even waiting for the outcome," he said. Clara turned slightly toward him. "I'm not waiting to be certain. You already think you are." Clara held his gaze. "I already have enough." Jeremiah did not respond, because the statement did not invite negotiation. That night, the house was quieter than it had ever been. Not because there was less sound, but because there was nothing left unspoken that needed to be addressed between them. In the morning, Clara Whitmore carried her bag to the door. She did not rush. She did not hesitate. She placed her keys on the table, not as a gesture, as a record. Jeremiah stood a few feet away. He did not try to stop her, because he understood finally that this was no longer a moment he could interrupt. Clara opened the door, stepped outside, and closed it behind her. She did not look back, not because she needed to prove something, but because everything she had needed to see had already been observed, documented, and placed where it would remain. Inside the house, Jeremiah Whitmore stood alone, the structure around him intact, but no longer his. Outside, Clara walked to her car, set her bag inside, sat for a moment with her hands resting on the steering wheel, not thinking, not questioning, just allowing the stillness to exist. Then she started the engine and drove away. The final outcome did not arrive as a single moment. It unfolded the way everything else had in Clara Whitmore's life over the past weeks, through process, through sequence, through records that aligned, until there was no space left for ambiguity. By the time the case reached its formal conclusion, the story no longer belonged to either of them. It existed in documents, in transcripts, in verified timelines that had been examined, cross-referenced, and accepted within systems that did not rely on interpretation alone. Jeremiah Whitmore did not collapse under accusation. He eroded under structure. The medical reports confirmed the presence of a non-prescribed compound in his system, one that had no reasonable explanation within the narrative he had provided. The timeline of symptoms matched the documented entries Clara had maintained over weeks. The differences between her condition and his on the morning of the incident were noted repeatedly in clinical language that avoided assumption, but left little room for coincidence. The financial records expanded under review. The previously undisclosed account was no longer isolated. It connected to a series of transactions that had been structured carefully, but not invisibly. Patterns emerged. Timing aligned with Clara's documented symptoms. The movement of funds suggested preparation rather than routine activity. The emails once retrieved and preserved did not state intent in direct language. They did not need to. Phrases such as "after things settle, timing matters," and "once everything clears" appeared in proximity to financial planning and future arrangements. They formed a pattern of anticipation that extended beyond ordinary discussion. Alyssa Munro did not testify. She did not need to. Her absence spoke in its own way, consistent with the rest of the structure. Clara Whitmore did not attend every proceeding. She was present when required. She provided statements when asked. She answered questions directly, without expansion, without emotional framing. She did not attempt to shape the narrative. She did not need to, because the narrative had already been built from the record. Naomi Keller handled the civil process with the same precision she had demonstrated from the beginning. The divorce proceeded under documented grounds that did not rely on personal testimony alone. The protective order remained in place throughout the process, not as punishment, but as structure. The division of assets followed the review that had already been initiated, guided by the financial discrepancies that had been uncovered. There was no dramatic confrontation in court, no raised voices, no moment where one side declared victory over the other. Only a sequence of decisions, each one supported by what had been documented. Jeremiah's defense did not fail because it lacked effort. It failed because it lacked alignment. His explanations shifted, not dramatically, but enough. Small inconsistencies appeared where consistency had been required. Statements that once seemed stable no longer matched the established timeline. The structure he attempted to build in response could not hold against the one that had already been formed. He was not defined by a single statement. He was defined by the accumulation of contradictions. Clara did not watch that erosion with satisfaction. She did not return to observe it more closely than necessary. She did not seek confirmation beyond what the process required. Because what mattered had already been established long before the final decision. The conclusion, when it came, was delivered in language that mirrored everything that had led to it. Clear, measured, documented. The court recognized the pattern of behavior, the risk it represented, and the consistency of the evidence presented. The legal outcomes reflected that recognition. The marriage was dissolved. The protective measures were formalized. The financial separation was enforced. The investigation beyond the civil process continued where applicable, but Clara's role in it did not require further presence. After it was over, there was no announcement. No moment that marked the exact point where everything ended. Only a quiet shift, a transition from one structure to another. Clara Whitmore moved into a smaller apartment on the edge of a different part of the city. It was not temporary. It was not provisional. It was chosen. The space was simple. A living room with a single window that faced west, allowing the afternoon light to settle softly across the floor. A kitchen that held only what was necessary. A table positioned with intention, not decoration. Everything had a place. Everything could be accounted for. On the first morning in that apartment, Clara woke at her usual time. There was no interruption, no sound beyond what she allowed into the space. She moved through her routine without deviation. Shower, clothing prepared the night before, a cup placed on the counter. She reached for the tea, not the brand Jeremiah had introduced, the one she had always used. She measured it, boiled the water, waited the exact amount of time she had always preferred. Then poured. The steam rose in the same controlled pattern she had observed countless times before. But this time, there was no second variable, no unknown element, no need to compare. She lifted the cup, paused briefly, not out of hesitation, out of habit. Then she took a sip. The taste was clean, consistent, unaltered. Clara set the cup down, not because she needed to stop, but because the act itself had already confirmed what it needed to. Her notebook rested on the table, closed. Not because it was no longer useful, but because it was no longer required in the same way. The record it had created had already been transferred into systems that would preserve it. Clara did not discard it. She placed it in a drawer, not hidden, not displayed, stored. The day moved forward as any other would. Work, emails, tasks that required attention. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that marked the past as something separate from the present. There were moments brief and unintrusive where memory aligned with observation. The kitchen in the old house, the cups, the pattern. But those moments did not linger, because they had already been resolved. Not emotionally, structurally. Clara did not speak about what had happened unless asked directly. And when she did, her answers remained the same. I documented it. Nothing more, nothing less. What she carried forward was not the event itself, but the method that had allowed her to move through it. Observation, consistency, patience, trust in structure over reaction. The apartment remained quiet, not empty, defined. That evening, as the light shifted across the room, Clara prepared another cup of tea. She followed the same steps, measured, precise, unchanged. She sat at the table, lifted the cup, and drank. There was no sense of victory in the moment. No satisfaction drawn from what had been lost or gained. Only clarity and the absence of uncertainty. Outside, the city moved as it always had, unaware, unchanged. Inside, Clara Whitmore remained exactly who she had been from the beginning. Not louder, not different, just unaltered by the need to explain what had already been proven. She finished the tea, set the cup down, and allowed the quiet to remain. In the end, nothing about Clara Whitmore's story needed to be raised to be understood. There were no declarations, no moments designed to force recognition, no scenes constructed to make a point louder than it already was. What remained was something quieter and in many ways more difficult to ignore. A pattern had existed. It had been observed, not assumed, recorded, not exaggerated. And when the time came, it had been placed into a system that did not rely on emotion to define it. There's a kind of strength that does not announce itself. It does not argue, does not interrupt, does not demand to be believed. It waits, it watches, and it builds something that can stand on its own. Clara never needed to prove anything by speaking over someone else. She allowed the evidence to speak where it mattered. And when it did, she stepped away. Not to escape, but because her presence was no longer required for the truth to remain intact. If you've stayed with this story until now, you've seen what quiet strength can look like when it refuses to disappear. If this left something with you, you can let it be known in whatever way feels natural. You can share where you're watching from, what time it is for you right now, or simply what you think about how this unfolded. And if stories like this matter to you, the kind that don't rush, don't shout, but still arrive exactly where they need to, you can choose to stay for the next one.